Eesh. Yo. Man, we just watching some watching reacting to some weird shit. Y'all hit me up, say whatever, open to whatever. We just chilling.
Well, I'd like to tell the story, sort of. A story of a specific civilization and a group of people descendant from the ancient ones. I'd like to talk about ancient Greece and how that was in many ways the first civilization remotely like ours. How they had lots of ideas. They had the great ancient Greek philosophers, even the pre-Socratics. You had Heraclitus and Democritus and people like that. You had Socrates. His best student was Plato. His best student was Aristotle. His best student was Alexander the Great, who conquered half the known world. And then, as a civilization that combined with that one, that took in the best parts of it and combined it with an
Are you
imperialism,
tired of clean
with
clothes that just don't smell
a
clean?
sort
What
of
if your clothes could stay fresh for
martial
weeks?
order and
Now they
zeal,
can.
and a obvious nationalism. The Romans were obviously, they're quoted all the time as, one of the great civilizations ever known to mankind, an empire that lasted for 1,000 years. And it started as a pagan empire, and then, it's for a while, I think official religion was Judaism, or at least the prevalent one. And then what happened is, starting with the Emperor Constantine, the Christians started to gain major influence in Rome, and now we see the real foundations of all European descendant civilizations that were under Rome before the fall, before the split between, the Holy Roman Empire and the Byzantine Empire. And it seems like since that point we've had many different civilizations, many different ethnic groups from different places. You see, England, Spain, France, Germany. It's all of these civilizations are descendant from Rome and Greece in some way. They share the philosophy.
Weren't they all fighting each other though? Like European history says they were at each other's throats constantly.
They respect them. They they learn about all the ancients, even people they disagreed with, because they thought that the ideas were important. There were great thinkers who came before them, and they respected that. They respected tradition. They respected the ancient knowledge and wisdom. And you can see this play out in their architecture, in all of their cultures that grew side by side, distinct. They all had, many, many differences, and you can see them obviously just looking at those cultures, looking at their traditions. But they all had some things in common, being descendant from these mother civilizations, and they still do in many ways today. Now, I'd say that at some point, the these civilizations have largely derailed from this, and they've gone in a different direction, which is, obviously, it's a different, yeah, I'd have to say a different direction, and they've turned to liberalism, starting with what, the French Revolution or something, somewhere around there. Now we see in America specifically today these ancient this ancient wisdom is being
What is this dude talking about with this ancient stuff, man? He ain't making any sense right now.
completely abandoned. We see the cultural, um, I guess, decay from these mother civilizations, that we no longer respect them. We want to tear down all the statues from history of the great leaders all throughout it, in all of Western civilization. I'm not just talking about slave owners, but the founding fathers of America, people who existed even before America. There are people here now who completely disrespect this and reject the entire history of this civilization. Now, when these separate civilizations all created empires and dominated the known world, they had they brought order to a lot of people that didn't have, infrastructure and things like
Oh, here we go. The people that went around the world killing a whole bunch of people brought order.
that. I think in many ways they made a lot of the colonized countries greater than the ones who were next to them, which never were colonized. And as we see decolonialization, we see that these other peoples who are not descendant from this are rejecting it entirely and going back to their old ways. And when that happens, things don't turn out so well for the people who are descendant from those mother civilizations, the European descendant groups. And for me, I'd like to argue tonight that these civilizations should still exist, adapting in many ways maybe, but there's something worth preserving there. I'm expecting Destiny tonight to, get into all sorts of little, maybe little nitpicking details about how is Mexican music different.
This dude just made a whole argument that he don't even believe in. Like, I don't even get this. Like, dude, you're not even sure of what the hell you just finished saying.
From American music, like he did before, maybe quiz me on musical terms, like partials and blues scales or something like that. I think that's all completely beside the point. And maybe I couldn't tell you with the correct terminology the difference between Mexican music and American music, but I can tell you that if you play them both in front of me, I can tell you the difference. And that's what you see today is, a lot of these things like culture, which are very difficult to articulate and describe, they are visible upon plain view when you go to different places, how these people are different. So, I'd like to get into that a little bit tonight, and I'd like to talk about the future of where this nation is headed, where all of Europe is headed, the future of a white minority in the United States, while we have these two separate groups of peoples that, one descendant from ancient Rome and Greece and largely categorized by Christendom throughout history, and the people who are not, who see them as invaders, as oppressors, as colonizers, as slave owners, as people who did the Holocaust. I see all this as a major problem, and I think there's going to, there's going to be all sorts of cultural and social conflict that we're headed towards that won't be so good for those people.
Okay, thank you. Destiny.
Oh, wow.
I'm sorry, what the fuck is this debate over again? Can I get a quick refresher on it?
Immigration, and little Timmy.
Okay. Jesus. So I think that today, the internet especially,
shit.
and all the technology around us has kind of led us to be more isolated than I think we have at any other point in human history. Technology was supposed to be the thing that kind of like bridged our worlds together, give us an ability to communicate with each other, and allow this kind of like inflow and outflow of culture and friendship and relationship and communication and all this stuff to happen. And in some ways it has, but I think in other ways it's left people feeling more disconnected or isolated than they have in the past. I think that these feelings of disconnection and isolation are weighing on people, and I think it leads them to try to find these little niche groups where it feels like they have something that they can identify with, because it is no longer with your local communities, or it seems like it's no longer with the local church. So some people, become rabid socialists or communists, and they try to pretend that they're Marxists or whatever, even though they've never read a word of Marx. And other people, unfortunately, their skin color, they find white identitarian groups and like, oh, well, we're white, like that can be our thing. I don't want to go back to shitting in the streets. I like playing video games on my computer, and I like all of the modern accessories and luxuries that exist in our current day life. I don't see the need to get rid of any of that. I don't see an advantage of going back to, usually people say go back to the 1950s, but I guess now we're talking all the way back to the 400s, if we're going back to Rome. So yeah, I think that the idea that you can freeze culture in any type of glass and have this unchanging, unmoving culture is really silly. I guess through the course of this debate, the thing that I'll seek to establish is that one, you don't really have a good way of identifying what any of your problems are. Instead, it's all kind of just these vague notions of like, well, what about this, if that, or giving some incorrect diagnosis for why Rome fell. Spoiler alert, it wasn't because of uncontrolled immigration. And then I'll more importantly point out that even though you can't identify the problem, or especially because you can't identify the problem, you also have no real prescription. And I think that's kind of one of the saddest things for a lot of these more radical groups is you get a lot of these people that get kind of funneled into these groups where they're like, okay, well, we're white, we got to protect our culture, what do we do? And you don't really have any answers for that. You're not winning legislatively anywhere. You don't have your own country anywhere. You don't have any representation anywhere. And you really don't have any plans forward for like, well, how do we make these groups? You know, instead of encouraging people to live healthier lives, to make friends, to go out and socialize, it's more just like getting more and more in the weeds of these insane online whatever groups where you continue to like exhibit the most unhealthy behavior possible. So yeah, I guess that's what we'll talk about in this conversation.
Ooh, this debate.
Sure. Well, the first thing I'd like to say is I'm glad that you openly admit that white people who seek to preserve and sustain any form of their culture and any part of it, they have no representation today. They are largely outnumbered by people who are against that. They, don't have any political power, and there's basically no one sticking up for them. And I think that's a big part of the problem I'd like to get into tonight.
Sure. Can you tell me what aspects of white culture do you think need to be represented politically that are not currently represented politically?
Well, it's a good question. What I'd say is that you
should have the answer to those questions. Like that's a layup from your perspective, right? If you're arguing for white culture or whatever that is, you should easily be able to define those things. Really easy.
Yeah, America right now is a lost nation in some ways when it comes to culture. And it has been for quite some time. As you correctly pointed out before, America has been a mixing of different ethnic groups for a very long time now. And even while it was still just the European descendant groups that are all mixing together, even though they had more in common than people from Africa or China or India, or South America, there's still a mixture which is causing
we're kind of like
of a cohesive culture.
Yeah, so
and
we're trailing off
these communities in order to dissolve, like you said, where people are not able to just go out and in the public square or in have what I don't know, but like public dances, things like that.
You can go on the public center public dances.
They get to know each other, right?
You can do that all right now.
Church.
You can do all of this right now. So I'm going to go back and ask the question again.
But people are not for some reason, and that's the question, right?
Yeah, but this is the whole. Yeah, so this is the whole point. So I think there's a lot of interesting conversation that we can have about why people aren't going out publicly anymore. I think there's an interesting conversation to be had about the loss of churches as the kind of centerfold for communities. I think the loss of union culture probably plays into that quite a bit. I think that the hyperfixation on moving to the coast into these like more concentrated cities for jobs, the economic opportunities is probably a reason. I think that technology leads us to be more and more culturally isolated from each other because we connect via the internet now instead of via face-to-face. I think that there are plenty of interesting kind of questions to ask to figure out why we're kind of like more isolated. I don't think the answer is because there aren't enough white people or we're losing our white culture. So I'm going to bring us back one more time and we'll see how long you talk without actually answering this question again. What are some aspects of American culture that you believe aren't adequately represented in Congress? Like what are some aspects of white American culture that you'd want to see represented in Congress, and where should they be represented?
Well, it's funny that you would phrase the question that way because it's there's an obvious push in all of not just the media but in government against what people in critical race theory would call white culture, and they seem very good at describing the differences between white culture.
I have yet to hear anyone accurately describe culture yet. These videos, I just see them just trying to watch all these kind of crazy stuff about what's going on in this country. And it just seems like everybody can define or everybody knows what the problem is, yet no one could define anything. Like, why is that?
In African American culture or Latin culture, and they seem even more interested in making our the culture in America like those other ones than what you call white.
So can you tell
culture.
me, what do
So-
people in critical race theory define white culture as then, if they've defined it? So you can't give me your definition. So how do they define it, since you're citing them now?
Yeah, sure. Things like the Protestant work ethic, things like the focus on
So America is already one of the most overworked
time
nations.
orientations
Yeah.
are
So,
there's the emphasis on the scientific method.
So America,
there's,
so
rugged
America,
individualism.
yeah, so
there's the holidays, there's the traditions, it's the heroes,
okay,
it's the shared story of a people that goes back for thousands.
That's not white specific, like at all. Nothing about that is just white specific.
Thousands of years, and
Okay,
that's
yeah.
the difference, is that
Yeah.
these people, they see themselves as descended from these civilizations. That's the story that a lot of Americans grew up being told, is look, here is the long course of history of your civilization, of your people, and you have you're born into this. Whereas other people from other groups, they don't see it the same way. They have a different shared story, and these shared stories are one of the most important parts of culture, next to language, which is they see it as these people did all of this and then colonized and oppressed your people, and they see it as a bad thing rather than a good thing. And so I think a big part of it is just simply embracing the traditions, embracing the historical Western European identity, and the people who are not from that are not going to buy into that, whereas the people who are,
The people who he thinks he's referring to are having a hard time buying into that. Never mind anyone else. I mean, but again, his whole narrative is false from the jump. He's not even making any sense right now.
I think that we could live a much better future if they did that.
So two big parts. So number one, this is kind of pointless, but I'll just bring attention to this. Every time I ask you a question, all you do is you start reading me another script or another monologue, like you're giving a speech. I'm trying to engage you in a one-on-one conversation, but it seems like every single time I ask you a question, you have to kind of like dive off into some other. I don't know if you have these written down.
I don't think that happened at all. I think I gave you 4 or 5 different answers of just small examples of white culture.
Yeah, so,
and largely what I'm describing more, I see that you're trying to drag the conversation down into the weeds on like specific parameters or facets of culture. That's like, what's this one thing you want? And we can talk about that all night. But there's something larger than that happening here.
So if you want to do turnabout as fair play, if you want, you can ask me about some more complicated topic that I enjoy, that has many facets to it. I will be able to defend to you every single one of those facets about that particular thing that I enjoy. I'm sorry, but I wholesale reject this idea that me asking you about any of these 4 or 5 things that you say are the most important qualifiers of your culture as getting lost in the weeds. With all due respect, these are the weeds that you're running us into, and you're the one that has the inability to defend them. I noticed that you opened the speech up being upset about our last musical
I keep seeing this guy Destiny around now that I've been watching some of these videos and everything like that, and I still don't know exactly what to make of him. It seems like him and I, we might be around the same age, 35. Might have the same leanings. I'm not sure, but like every time I'm trying to like get an idea what my fellow Americans are talking about, like white conservatives or conservatives or anything like that, or any sort of these discussions, man, it just doesn't seem like, seems like it's him and a few other people, not that many others. Wonder why.
conversation. I will remind you once more, the only reason we had that conversation is because you're the one that said that you had the background in music and you were a professional musician and you were the one that wanted to get into that conversation. And we don't have to have that conversation, but
First
if you're
of all,
going to
I
bring
did
up a
have a
topic,
background in
I am
music,
going to
and
ask you questions. Okay, hold on. If you want to go line by line, we can do this, but when you ramble on a monologue, I'm going to respond to every single thing you said. So I'm going to do that. This is why this conversation is already kind of like getting off track,
sure,
right?
of
So
course.
if you're going to bring up 4 or 5 things that are all part,
for the trees,
I haven't.
man.
No, I'm not losing anything, right? Forests don't exist unless trees are in them. Okay, we're trying to figure out if you have any trees
That's
at all.
very
That's the
true.
problem right now, right? So when you start
And
to
so
say
you're
things,
denying that there is any facet that exists to white identity at all, or European descendant groups in any manner. Is
White and European is not the same thing. Like, I really need my fellow Americans to understand that. White and European are not the same thing. White really is a uniquely American term, and people really need to acknowledge that.
Is that what you're saying? There's no trees in this forest
I think
whatsoever.
that in the
so
United
who
States
cares
of
if we
America,
steamroll over it?
in the United States of America, wait, are you trying to talk, Brittany?
No, go ahead. I
Oh.
was gonna. Go ahead.
Okay. In the United States of America, if people were to start asking me where your big cultural divides are, I think that the number one easily would be urban versus rural. That would be my huge cultural divide. And then we could start going down other lines. But in terms of falling down ethnic lines, I mean, firstly, like how you would even begin to define white gets hairy, right? What are we talking about for like mixed race relationships? What about for like a lot of Hispanic people? So like my mom is Cuban, but none of us are really dark. A lot of people that come from Cuba aren't. You know, you've got the whole mestizo versus castizo thing. Like you've got children of like relatively Hispanic looking people that look pretty white. Like this whole idea that you're trying to separate things out as like these people have this culture and these people have this culture, when it's probably way more regional, and people can tell that. Like this is another thing too, like people can tell just by the jokes you say or the way you sound, you know, like are you from the East Coast, are you from the West Coast, are you from California, are you from Northern Florida? These like racial lines that you're so obsessed with drawing, I don't think most people even identify across these culturally.
Yeah, I didn't put it that way at all. In fact, I'm not talking about skin color in any way. That's something you brought up. I'm talking
to be
about
clear, you
the
said
shared
mixing a
history
lot of
people.
different ethnic groups. You used that word multiple times. I've written it down on a notepad in front of me. I'm writing that down. So if you
Sure,
telling me
you
this
think
has,
that ethnicity and race are the same thing?
can you tell me the difference between the two?
Yeah, sure. Race is, well, let's go with, for the sake of discussion, the critical
Yeah, sure. Well,
race theory definition.
No, let's go with
race.
your definition. You're the one using the word, so you tell me how you're using it. If you want to draw a distinction between race and ethnicity, that's
Well,
fine. Tell me how you just.
I'm not the one who brought up race. See, I brought up ethnicity, and ethnicity I can go into. That's different. Ethnicity is a group of people who have a shared history. They have a shared culture. They have generally shared religion, a language, music, art, all of these things, architecture. It all ties in together because it's a group of people who are distinct from other ethnic groups.
So can
And
you
so
give me
can
an
say
example
that's
of
racial,
like?
but
Yeah,
there
can you give me an
there
example
are
of an
people
ethnic
who are
group?
largely the same race who have gone into separate ethnic groups with distinct identities, right?
Yeah.
So absolutely, this idea that it's racial is I haven't said anything like that at all. Now,
Well, so if you have like
you're asking about culture, and I've told you already, the most important part of one of the most important parts of culture to me is the shared story, shared history of a people, because a lot of things are downstream from that. The traditions, which, like, what do they represent? Something in that story. The holidays would represent something in that story. The heroes, the legends, the
everything this dude is mentioning isn't white specific. Like that's not a culture, man. That's like that's a shared history amongst like a bunch of different groups of people, like not just one specific based on ethnicity or race, man. Like again, if I'm supposed to believe it, then I gotta ignore European history that says all those white people and all those Western countries weren't constantly at war with each other. I mean, by his logic or by the uniquely American term, that was a bunch of white people killing other white people. Is that part of white culture? Something tells me you want to frame it that way.
archetypes of
So this
what
is
it
we're
means
on the monologue
to be
again.
a man
This is
and a woman,
the
things like
memorized
that.
speech again. Yeah.
Well, you just asked me to get real specific about one of the
I
aspects
didn't.
of
All I
culture, and
asked
there
you
it
was
is.
no. All I asked you was the difference between race and ethnicity. I didn't ask you anything about culture. But every time you answer a
Well, that's
question,
what
you've
you
got to
were asking
dive
before.
into
You
your
said I
prepared
didn't
speech
answer
again.
any questions at all whatsoever. And I described the difference between race and ethnicity right there.
Yeah, so now I'm
Do
trying
you
to ask you a question to figure out if you really believe this. So would you say that a black person and a white person that grew up in the same ghetto and came out of it with all the same values and gangster rap and whatever you want to ascribe to them, right? You'd say, oh, that white guy and that black guy, those guys are both ethnically the same. You would say that?
Yeah, I don't think there's actually a good example of that takes place by virtue of the fact alone that these people have different shared stories. The white guy and the black guy, maybe if you look at just their lives or like what they ate that week or to what they've done in the past 10 years.
This guy must not know any black people because there's no way he just said that. with a straight face. Like, there's just no way. That's just can't. No way.
Maybe you could say it like that. Like, these people have a lot of things in common. They can talk on the same level. They know what they're talking about, things like that. But when it comes to the larger arc of history, these people have completely different stories, and their people groups have completely different stories. And I think that
So
a part of what I'm here to
doing the
to
memorized
describe
speech
is that
again.
the issue
Yeah.
of mashing all of these people together, it denies both of those people in that scenario their
So-
historic people's identity, which
Yeah.
is important.
Yep. Okay. Good speech. So I'm going to ask you the question again since you
Thanks.
seem to be unable to answer it. So if you have a black guy and a white guy, they grow up in the same neighborhood, go to the same schools, listen to the same music and all that shit. Would you say that that black person and that white person are ethnically the same thing?
I think I just answered that like exactly. Do you want me to just repeat myself?
I'd like you to answer that question without giving me a speech about like, well, I would say they're culturally similar. I'm asking you because I asked you for a definition of ethnicity, and you gave me a definition I've never heard before. Now, maybe some people use this definition. I'm just curious
That's
if
the
you really
definition
believe
that's
it.
used in
So
international
you said
relations
ethnicity
textbooks. You're
had
more than
a.
likely to
You
look up the
said that.
definition of ethnicity. It doesn't surprise me that you don't know it, given that you're totally okay with wiping them out all across the planet.
I've never said anything about wiping anything out. I'm just
Sure,
curious.
you're talking about mashing all sorts of people from different historically ethnic groups together, making them both grow up in the exact same way in everything, in some postmodern worldview, some constructivist idea that you were going to just make everybody.
But within the culture itself, right? That's what everyone is doing within the culture itself, right? Shared values, same tradition, about the same beliefs, right? Like, you know, he keeps telling people, or he keeps telling this guy that he's wrong, but he keeps mixing up all the different definitions. It's like, you know, you're not even sure of your own argument, man.
All come together in this
Is
new
every single
identity.
person that went to your high school the exact same ethnicity? Did they become that by going to the same
No,
school?
not at
Is
all.
every
And,
single
the
person in
people
a
of-
workplace the
people
exact
of
same
different
ethnicity?
ethnic groups in my high school all identified with each other. Actually, it's like all the black kids hung out in the same spot all together every single day. They were even there during classes. I'm not sure how it worked.
Cool.
But
So
they,
I'll
they
ask-
hold themselves distinct. It's not something I've done. This
So-
is something people all across the world, all across the planet do. Okay,
I
had
understand.
a
We're
friend
going
that-
into another memorized speech. I
Sure,
understand.
go for
Yeah.
it.
Okay. Yeah.
There's
So
no memorized
it is
speeches,
another
man.
memorized
This
speech.
is
Yeah.
all
So I've
on the
asked two
fly.
questions. I haven't gotten an answer on either. So we're right after that start. I'll try to do this ethnicity one more time. It should be a simple yes from you if you truly believe the answer you're giving me. So if you have a black guy and a white guy, grew up in the same neighborhood, same shared experiences, same music, same movies, and everything, would you say that these two people are ethnically identical? This black person and this white person are of the same ethnicity. Would you say that?
Yeah, not at all. And the reason for that is what I've been saying all along this whole time is it's a group of people with a shared history. That's one of the most important parts of culture. And I've described it as a
You know how many Americans since the founding of this country have a shared history? Like, even if you want to start American history at July 4th, 1776, think about the different ethnic groups that made up the nationality of American at that time.
lot. I mean, you can call it a monologue all you want, but it's very important because a lot of aspects of culture all come downstream from that. The holidays, the heroes, the
Yep, so
traditions,
we're doing the memorized
the
speech
language,
again. We're
the
doing the memorized speech
colloquialisms.
again. We're doing
No,
the memorized
these are all
speech
just
again.
ideas off the top of my head. I'm not like
I can tell they're
you
coming
know,
off the
a
top of
guy
your head
who
because
goes
you didn't
online and
prepare for
talks
this.
all day like
I don't know
you.
why
I
you
don't
would
have
think that
anything
if I talk
memorized.
about this type of shit all day, I don't know why you think you can do this conversation on the fly with me. That's kind of surprising. Or you just like think I'm an idiot, I guess.
Yeah, well, then it's interesting that you say that, but yeah, when I give you like exactly the answers to your questions, you're completely dumbfounded as to like how you can possibly respond to that. Because I understand you want the answer. You want the answer to be like, yeah, oh no, it's all about just white people and it's all about race and we should ship everybody else off or something like that. I get that that's the answer you're looking for. That's just not the answer that I have for you. So instead of just keeping on trying to keep this conversation down on this one point on, well, you didn't give me the answer I wanted for ethnicity. You gave me the international relations definition of it.
So
Instead
if you're
of
telling
that,
me,
maybe you can try and move this conversation
I'm trying to move
forward.
wrong. So if you're telling me that a
Because we
black,
have important things to
I
discuss.
understand. So if you're telling me that a black person and a white person can never have the same ethnicity, then it seems like there's
let's
some
move this
aspect of skin
forward.
color
Ain't
that's
no
important there, or some
way.
genetic aspect that's important there. Can you at least admit that? Or
Well, It's funny that you categorize it according to racial lines, according to skin color, especially
To
because
be clear, you're the one that's done
work camp or get executed for it because it's degenerate. So, you know, you don't see that in South Korea, and I think that they have largely distinct and different cultures at this.
Wait, so are they ethnically the same
For
or
them,
not?
both descendant from a mother civilization, for them to come together and reforge an identity at some point in the future. I don't know. It's a good question.
I like the fact that in this debate he has said that a white person and a black person could theoretically be the same ethnicity. I think that's my favorite thing so far.
Yeah, I didn't say that though. I said that the people from different groups all across the planet with different long arc of history of their civilizations, they will never be the same ethnicity.
Okay. All right. So from Tenro, black guy here. Most blacks in this country don't consider themselves American and go on only their ethnicity all the time. Blacks are literally
Wait, what? We don't consider ourselves American? That's a new one.
taught to hate whites and other cultures in every facet on their consumption.
Okay, so just as a quick educational course for you people, okay? So whoever wrote that, okay, is the literal whitest possible donor that could ever exist in all of mankind.
Yeah, actually not
So
true.
black people don't go by their black people. So black people don't go. Black people don't go by their quote unquote ethnicity because a lot of black people that came over here don't know what their ethnic roots are. That's why the term African American was invented. It's because they don't actually know which countries they originate from. When they were brought over as slaves, all of them were basically mixed up. And so they don't have like the trip to Ellis Island to read the books. It's, oh, this is where my great grandfather came over. Or like, oh, my great 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 grandpa came on the fucking Mayflower. Great 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 grandpa came on the fucking Mayflower. They don't know that. So the idea that like black people are like, oh no, I'm not actually American. I'm from fucking Kenya or some shit. That's just, if you're a descendant of a slave, you don't know shit like that. Sorry.
Yes.
Right. So real quick, he's right. Even though lately there seems to be a slight difference between African American and Black American. So, like for example, if you're an African American, then most likely you're what? What's the subgroup of that, right? You may be a Nigerian American, you may be a Congolese American, you may be a Kenyan American, you may be Egyptian American. But it again, I don't know if there's a complete consensus on that. But typically, when you're talking about Black Americans, you're talking about those who we could trace our roots to slavery, which then implies, yeah, we don't know exactly what areas we came from. We know it was mainly West and Central Africa. But yeah, the more specifics in general, we don't know. But like an African American, again, are you talking about Nigerian Americans who immigrated here? You're talking about Kenyan Americans. You're talking about Ethiopians. You're talking about Moroccan Americans. Again, like, it's the same thing with Asian American, right? Well, what do you have under Asian American? Okay, well, you got Japanese, Korean, Chinese, Vietnamese, Filipino, Indian, Bangladesh. You have all those different nationalities, basically, right? Same thing with Middle Eastern. Well, you could be Iranian, you could be Saudi, you could be Palestinian, you could be Israeli, you can be Iraqi. Like that makes up all the groups of Middle Easterns. And so, even when you try to mix up white, or what is white? Okay, are you talking about Italian Americans? You're talking about Scottish Americans? You're talking about Irish Americans? Because I'm not sure if you want to call yourself, if you tell an Irish American that they got the same lineage and should be proud of their same culture like English Americans, you might get some pushback on that. Because if you ever seen how the English have treated the Irish, not good.
So I think it's funny how Destiny says, and I know I say that too much. It is funny, but Destiny's a funny guy. It's funny how
They say that laughter is a good sign of nervousness, so it's not surprising to me that you find a lot of what I say pretty humorous.
What?
Laughter is a sign of nervousness, so you saying that everything I say is funny is pretty interesting.
laughter is a sign of just vibing, man. It's like
yeah,
maybe
we're
you should try
vibing
it a
something
little
right
more.
now. Yeah.
So it's interesting that Destiny he fully admits that it was bad for American blacks, African Americans, that their cultures were wiped out and stripped from them, and that they're largely confused in many ways. He says they don't even have an ethnicity anymore.
We're not confused, right? The heritage might have been lost because of the Atlantic slave trade, but as we exist today, like, we're not confused.
And he would probably deny them a unique ethnic culture to themselves, African Americans, even though I think most of them would disagree with him. And yet he says that if we just destroy and wipe out all of the ethnic history of the historic American people, that would be totally fine, and we can forget all the ancient stories, and you don't inherit any culture from even the ancient civilizations, much less the ones which we came from a couple hundred years ago. And
Is there
also,
another? I don't know if my. I don't know if
real
my.
black guy, and he's totally based. 07's in chat to Tenrio.
Yeah.
T's in chat. This is a real guy.
I don't
Real
know if there's
human
like
being
a
right there.
glitch in the what is this StreamYard, and I can't see the other Destiny you're talking to, but I don't know where you come up with all these completely fabricated positions of mine. I've never said that we should forcibly wipe out anybody's culture. The reason why slavery was bad wasn't because people lost their culture. It's because we forcibly took people from one area and then intentionally attempted
think
to
it was
genocide
bad
their
that they
culture,
lost their
and then
culture?
intentionally
Yes or no?
No, I don't think that losing culture is always bad, because culture is always changing and
course.
always evolving throughout all of human history.
All right, Destiny. I get what you're trying to say, but when the culture's forcefully lost, yeah, that's a bad thing, right? Because now you just kind of fell into the white replacement theory stuff. It's like, well, they feel like their culture is being forcefully removed. However false, whatever the narrative is, however false it might be, that's how they believe. And then when you say things like that, it's like, oh, okay, well, you're not even acknowledging that it can be forced. Like, when you forcibly take a group of people and transplant them somewhere else, that's you're forcing the culture. Now, in general, when that doesn't happen, yes, culture is organic. That goes time, that changes. That could change year to year, depending on, how many people, how diverse the population is. But yeah, just a quick pushback. It can absolutely be removed, forcefully removed.
That's why you can't point to me a single static culture that has ever existed, because it never will, because culture always changes. There's nothing bad about losing, because you don't really
culture
lose.
adapting with the times and having it wiped out by another ethnic group completely.
Yeah, so can you give me an example of one aspect of white culture being wiped out by another ethnic group?
Man, it's
Exactly.
we've
So
gone
let's
through
go
this
on
all
to the
night.
next
Well, no, I
question. So
have.
let's go on to the next question.
I told you the nuclear family is a big one.
Let's go
man.
on to the next. The nuclear family. Who do you think is more likely to be in a nuclear family organization? A Hispanic couple, a black couple, or a white couple? Like, who do you think is more likely to champion for this like family organization?
Hold on, man. What is a nuclear family? I really need to see what this means. I keep hearing this. A couple and their dependent children regarded as a basic social unit. A nuclear family, elementary family, or conjugal family is the family group consisting of parents and their children, typically living in one home residence. It is in contrast to a single parent family, the larger extended family, or family with more than two parents. So you just described a whole bunch of families around the world that it's not even culturally specific. Like, it could just happen. But that's white. But somehow the nuclear family is white specific. That don't make any sense, man.
Do you think it's going to be white people, or do you think it's going to be people of color?
Yeah, I think right now, as I said throughout this, and that's why I've said it, that America is kind of in a cultural.
So you don't have an
right
answer
now.
for that. Now you have to talk around it, because the actual answer to
also
my
want me
question
to
is
say
white
half of the
people. White people aren't the ones defending the concept of the traditional family. That's going to come
white
more from
people
Hispanic
were the ones
people.
defending
That's
the
going to come
traditional
from
family. White
that's
people
going to
were
come
the
from
ones who
Hispanic
culturally
people, black
enforced the
people, and
traditional
Asian
family.
people.
Yeah, I can't with this one anymore, man. This dude, whoever he's arguing with, just Not really making any sense. I'm gonna check this out for
And
a
that if
bit.
you don't do them, they won't happen. That's a high vision. That's a high calling. By the way, that's true of our country. Our country will be less if you don't take on the obligations of citizenship. This country can be greater, it can be more with you as part of it, and it won't be what it could be without you. We need you.
Yeah, well, I think that's true, is that to the degree that each person is unique, and each person is unique to a great degree, then each person has something to bring into the world that only they could bring into it. That's a heavy load for each person to bear too, because it turns out that it isn't true that nothing you do matters. What's true is that everything you do matters a lot more than you think, and you should get the hell at it now. That when people do abdicate their responsibility.
I gotta stop. I can't. I gotta hop on another panel in a minute anyway.